The sky looked filthy, green and grey, as the sun desperately tried to penetrate a seemingly endless blanket of smog. It was hard to believe that this weather phenomenon was the result of a hero-villain battle. The anomaly was called the Shroud, after the villain who created it. The Shroud was a weather villain who could manipulate the chemicals in the air around him, causing storms. In his fight with the hero Dynamite, the villain was forced to retreat, only to be ambushed by his former villain allies, who saw weakness and went for a killing blow. But it was a blow that changed the surface of Japan for years to come. Before his passing, the Shroud injected himself with quirk boosters, a trade he initially oversaw. And after taking his own product, and overdose of his product specifically, he exploded, creating the unnatural smog. It was an apocalyptic scenario no one had foreseen, or at least specifically in this way. The smog itself wasn't dangerous. It just created this sickly eternal night. Right now, it should be the middle of summer. It should be hot and dry, but instead was moist and cool. Perfect weather for mold and villainous acts who, ironically, were quite similar in a metaphorical sense, of course. In the darkness of what Japan had become, criminality had returned to a level last seen when the League of Villains declared war on hero society as a whole. It was stress incarnate for the crime fighters. And as expected, the more weak-minded heroes instantly quit. A disgrace, really. But Japan was prideful, and even rejected the offers of the global defense effort. Surprised, the GDE simply sent additional support for their own assets within Japan. Something the country almost saw as a declaration of war, though even if it was, they couldn't do anything against it. The GDE was an organization, a military organization, with the combined might of Europe and America. But ironically, this was actually good for them. The villains now targeted the highly armored and equipped GDE convoys that drove all around the country. On one of these transports was you, GDE Subject 0095. You had a powerful quirk that had sent you straight into GDE custody after you turned 5 years old. Your quirk, our sacred blood of our holy mother of the burned visage, was considered one of the quirks the GDE's religious wing considered holy and in need of protection. So I sent you into the darkness of Japan. Ironically, thanks to the Shroud, GDE facilities had become even more hidden and even more defended. So under the pretense of simply delivering military supplies, the defense organization had started sending more powerful quirk users under their custody. Your quirk allowed you to set people on fire who committed crimes by simply looking at them. Your quirk was so unbelievably powerful, it even worked through photos and video recordings of your face. The problem with your quirk was its seemingly randomness. Anything you personally considered a crime counted towards instant incineration. Even a small crime such as stealing an apple was still stealing, and in the eyes of your quirk it was a punishment worthy of death. The problem also was, it didn't discriminate. An executioner in the eyes of your quirk was a murderer, even though what he did was just. The GDE considered you therefore a danger to society as a whole, and you had to be locked away. And hence why your face was now covered by a blindfold, and your hands locked into cylindrical handcuffs that made it impossible for you to grab anything. You were kneeling inside your truck, chained to its walls and floor, breathing shallow breaths. The quiet hum of a reality anchor could be heard. Even though it didn't protect from your quirk, it would prevent any reality warpers from attacking the convoy. Reality warpers were, after all, something the GDE was desperately afraid of. Why they just didn't remove your eyes altogether and replace them with cybernetics was a mystery to you. They had the technology, after all. Instead, they equipped your handlers with black masks with screens in their eyes that had the ability to black out any human face they looked at. This way, anyone could safely interact with you. Sadly, you had incinerated multiple scientists who thought they could take them off, but no. The truck stopped. There was some shouting outside, some laughter. You knew the platform you were on had wheels on it, so there was no need to stand up. You'd be carted right into the facility. But then you heard shots being fired. You gasped. An explosion followed, and your truck was thrown on its side. Helplessly, you were now dangling in your chains, as your toes just barely didn't reach the truck's wall. What a humiliation. Seconds passed. More shots, more screams, and then silence. That was terrifying. Suddenly, the unmistakable noise of someone breaking open the locks on your truck was heard. You braced yourself, and then the doors broke open.
Buzz, that's a kid. There's a goddamn kid in there.
You puffed up your cheeks. You weren't a kid anymore. You were 19, for God's sake.
What? You GD cultists are seriously doing child trafficking? That's hilarious.
The men approached you. You could hear it. Well, maybe you were a bit small for your age. And the fact you had been pampered by a semi-religious government organization your entire life was partially to blame, but come on. The men grabbed your face roughly.
Fuck's up with this one? Chains and shit. And a blindfold,
muttered another voice. You grinned. Take it off and see what happens, you said weakly. You couldn't see it, but the two villains looked at each other.
Now you probably have some crazy quirk like laser eyes.
You forced a smirk. It was hard to be confident in this situation. If I had, I could have shot through the cloth. This is just so I don't know where they are taking me. You could practically feel them smirk. You knew what they wanted to do with you. Probably. You had heard stories of that. And from the sound of it, it felt terrible. You felt a thick hand grab the cloth on your face and rip it off. And immediately looked at the two men. For a second, they just stood there, dumbfounded. And then, flames broke out of their mouths, eyes, noses, and in fact, every orifice they had. Their screams louder than the flames. It was grotesque. The smell of burnt, unseasoned pork soon filled the truck. As the two villains fell on their knees, their heads mere skeletons, covered in soot. You risked a peek at the truck's door. A dead GD soldier was lying there. It made you sad. Even though they were your captors, they were the only ones who actually understood you. You remained hanging there, incinerating any additional villain who dared to enter the truck. After all, the only ones that would go in here unprepared, well, would be villains. Adding 2 more bodies to the list of deaths caused by your quirk. Until suddenly, there were more explosions heard. At least 3. And after that went silent.
Hello? Subject, 0095, yes. Are you still alive?
Wait, they knew your number. You heard their footsteps. They were right behind your truck. I'm here, you shouted. I'm no longer blindfolded. Approach me with caution. The footsteps stopped for a second. The man then slammed his hand on the truck's underside.
Got it.
You heard the unmistakable noise of ripping cloth. And a moment later, a blond man entered. He had ripped off the arm of his shirt to use as his own blindfold.
I can't see. Don't worry, you can look at me,
he said. You sighed, as you explained the best way for him to come to your side, without stepping into any, skeletons or goop left behind by the villains. The man was wearing a hero costume, with an orange band around his upper right arm, indicating that he was a GDE-funded hero, or simply called an asset. He was quite handsome. Blonde spiky hair and unshaven spots on his lower jaw. A missing sleeve on his right arm revealing a very attractive muscular build. He looked like one of those princes from coloring books that you drew in as a child. It made you blush. It really was the first time a man ever did that to you. Normally you interacted with milquetoast scientists and soldiers who were quite literally paid to not give a crap about you, so they didn't have any bad feelings shooting you should you ever try to escape.
This is my first time dealing with one of you hellspawns, so, you better direct me.
Hellspawn? You had never been called that. Kinda made you smile. This opposite of respect. These scientists were so dry. The man sniffed the air.
I must have single-handedly protected the entire convoy.
Are there any survivors?
You?
Was all he said. With your directions, he managed to open your chains. And after placing your blindfold back, the man introduced himself.
My name is Bakugou Katsuki. A hero named Dynamite.
And then he took your hand in his. It was warm and calloused. So he knew battles. You smiled. Normally the hands that touched you were gloved. A hero had come to save you. It was then he noticed your naked feet. After all, you were only wearing a very loose white lab coat that reached down to your knees. The man sighed. You shouldn't walk through the scoop. And without a warning, he picked you up bridal style. He chuckled after you protested.
How's this, princess?
You bit your lower lip. Where are you taking me?
A facility, once reinforcements arrive.
He sat you down on a folding chair he had pulled out of his car, while he made a phone call, explaining the situation. He must be one of the GDE patrol heroes that drove up and down the streets. And they trust him a lot if he arrived on his own. Oh, maybe he had just been in the area. After you had been relocated into a new truck an hour later, you are driven to your new home. But it was all standard protocol. By now, so nothing new. All you could think of, though, was Bakugou. Despite your age, the protectiveness of your captors had resulted in you having a somewhat childish view on the world, which immediately made you idolize Bakugou as your hero as in someone you loved and wanted all to yourself. And so you asked anyone who cared to talk to you, to tell you more about Bakugou Katsuki, the great dynamite. Of course, you quickly learned that he wasn't the nicest person to be around, so immediately knew that you'll better not look at him without him being shielded from your quirk. But the more you learned, the more you just wanted to be with him. And so, you decided to nag your handlers. The GDE had a caretaker program that allowed them to be assigned a hero working for the GDE. It was mostly used to keep some individuals under GDE care healthy and cooperative. For instance, GDE subject 6973, a man with a quirk that essentially made him a walking nuke that could go off at any second if he got too upset, had been assigned the hero Alien Queen to both keep him level-headed and occupied, as they call it. Ironically, if she told him she was just doing this for the exorbitant paycheck caretakers received from the GDE, he'd instantly blow up half of Russia, the country where he was being securely held with the Japanese heroine. There were 3 rules for a caretaker to be considered for a subject. The hero's quirk was not biologically related to the subject, which would mean a potential offspring between the two would not be an overpowered monstrosity. After all, the entire reason for this GDE operation was to keep these people out of the gene pool. The chosen hero needed an adequately high rating in the GDE's loyalty test that was conducted 3 times per year for all applicants. At least a rating of 8 was required to be a caretaker, with 10 being the highest possible score. Lastly, the caretaker needed to be the preferred or recommended gender for the chosen GDE subject, as there had been cases that ended in tragedy for both caretaker and subject in the past. You yourself had what was called a sacred quirk. Not to mention it, also seemed to be genetically compatible with Bakugou, so there was practically no chance you would ever see him again. Especially if you two had a child together, its quirk would be a mix or perfection of either of your quirks. That was a scary thought, but they couldn't keep you away from him forever. Using whatever favors you had managed to create with GDS staff over your stay at the new facility, over a year had passed. And finally, it was time. You were brought into one of the few recreational rooms of the complex. It was made to imitate the outside, or more, a perfect version of it. With a real-time day and night cycle simulating a beautiful sky, artificial grass, artificial tree, some playground equipment. It was one of the only rooms in the complex without cameras, so it was very private too. Save of one armed guard who was standing at the entrance, but the guy was disinterested and practically asleep. You were sat down on a wooden bench. You could smell the scent of flowers and hear birds chirping. Knowing this was artificial didn't cross your mind even for a second. And after a while of you sitting there, humming, you felt someone sit down next to you.
It's been a while, huh?
He said. Hey, Mr. Katsuki, you said respectfully.
Nah, gotcha's alright.
You blinked behind your blindfold and looked into his direction. Gachan?
It's what, Deku calls me, and it just established itself after high school.
I see. Gachan. I like that. You smiled, and he blushed. Bakugou usually wasn't a sucker for love, but after hearing that you specifically asked for him and pulled so many strings to arrange this meeting and caretaker contract that he had to sign. He just had to sign it. The balls that you had. I wish I could see your face, but I doubt my quirk would allow that. He sighed.
Yeah, I'm not the nicest guy to be around.
The exact words they used. Tell me about your exploits, you said energetically, as you blindly reached for his hand. After 2 failed attempts at touching him, he gave in and placed his hand under yours for you to grab.
Well, there isn't much, really. After I signed the contract with the GDE as a support hero, of course. Because I'm in deep shit.
Huh? Explain. You knew why, of course, but you wanted to hear it out of his own mouth, with his own words.
Fine. Some time ago, like 2 years, I hunted this villain called the Shroud. He ended up dying in the pursuit, but he jacked himself up with quirk enhancers, changing the chemical compounds of the clouds around Japan, cursing us with this terrible weather. They were working super hard on fixing my mistake, but it doesn't look like it will be fixed anytime soon, still. I feel guilty. Still do. So I signed a GDE contract. I'm now under their protection, and do hero work under their name. It isn't as freeing as I hoped hero work to be. They have quite a tight leash around me, throat. I'm given cards of speeches written on them for the media. Spend almost no time in my actual apartments. It's horrible.
Concerned, your grip tightened.
But,
he quickly interjected.
It's better than what would have happened to me if I didn't sign it. After all, the media was after me. Civilians going for my throat. After all, I'm the reason the country is in crisis right now. Every villainous act my fault. And the GDE now sends me around the globe. I get some glory, some positive media, you know. My hope is after the clouds are gone, we have become normal enough. I get to be a normal hero again.
You certainly have a fast life, you admitted.
It's, that's a very optimistic way of putting it.
You fell to your side, landing softly on his lap.
Oh.
Do you have a fan club? You asked, as if you just didn't quite literally bump into him. And after a moment of shock, he sighed. He knew what he had to do. It was quite literally the contract. So gently, he started combing with one hand through your hair, while still holding your other in his. Bakugou was feeling somewhat affectionate towards you, but it was also duty to the GDE pushing him to do this. Though maybe this wasn't going to be so bad. Just don't look at her. We'd be doing this for a while and then return to the limelight, so might as well enjoy this for all it's worth. He brushed the hairs out of your face. Your lips a beautiful red. And surprisingly, you weren't even wearing lipstick. You were smiling, lips twitching in anticipation of a kiss. After all, why else would he open your face to him? He placed a hand on your head before slightly raising you.
Yeah, one of the biggest in all the world.
Your lips first touching only barely. The mere hint of it. As if he was unsure whether or not you wanted this or not. You reached up to his face, your thumbs barely missing his eyes, as you took hold of his head, pulling him closer. Your lips now pressed onto each other. Ah, your first kiss. You fought breathlessly. His mouth felt so hot and wet. It was a sensation like no other you had ever had before. Curiously, you pushed your tongue past your lips into his, and he accepted it almost immediately. Your tongues intertwined, gently rubbing over each other. A slimy, warm feeling that was both alien and pleasurable. Bakugou's tongue was strong and big. Behind your eye, behind your blindfold, your eyes rolled back in pure bliss. This moment was better than whatever you could have envisioned.
Thank you to the people who are supporting me on Ko-fi. You guys are keeping me alive.